Hello everybody, Nate here from Preparation 101, and today I'm going to tell you guys a little story. This will be kind of a breakdown on the history of my collection of survival knives, and I'm only going to be covering the primary knives that I've carried through the years. And to start with, I don't actually have the original knife that I started with. I can't even remember the age I was whenever I started being allowed to use this knife. It was one of those things where it was my knife, but I didn't get to keep possession of it at all times because I was that young. I could only use it under adult supervision and so on and so forth. But that knife, it was black, about a 6-inch blade on it, 5.5, 6-inch blade. But for some reason, that knife just couldn't hold an edge. It was something cheap, you know. So I'm going to start this video off with the first knife that was really quality that I ever owned in the survival knife category. So that first knife is the Cold Steel Bushranger. You might see a 2 stamped in the back of the handle. I don't know if that'll show up because it's kind of shady. But this knife was a second, which means it was cheaper, and there was some kind of blemish that did not affect quality. This Cold Steel Bushranger was made with carbon V steel, made in the USA. This, I believe I got this about 1999, 2000, somewhere in there. I was about 11 years old, and it was a Christmas present. The time I originally got this knife, it was one that, you know, I could only use under supervision. And for those that are curious about the specs anyways, from what I can find, I'll let them scroll down the screen here. But I've always loved this knife. This knife will always have a special place in my heart because I still remember seeing this in magazines and just thinking like, oh my gosh, that is the coolest knife in the world. I've never seen anything like that before. And Cold Steel makes those videos where they do demonstrations with their knives, and I remember like just blown away by this bad boy here. And it's pretty light actually for its size. It's pretty light, but it's balanced well enough forward. You can see, you know, balance points out here somewhere. And it was balanced enough forward that you could really use it to chop. And that was something that I really enjoyed about these bigger knives, was just the chopping and chopping. And this would have been, or this was my primary knife for, I'd say around 10 years, pretty close to 10 years. But again, this would be from the age of about 11 to 21 years old. So for, I don't know, the first 8 years of me having this knife, it didn't get used a ton. Just, you know, 4 or 5 times a year we'd go out and do little outings to practice our survival skills, and I'd get to use this. And then once I got older, I got possession of it solely to where, you know, I could keep it in my room. And through my high school years, I had other interests, you know, school and sports and skateboarding, all that kind of stuff, and chasing girls, you know, all the things that teenage guys like to do. And so I didn't really go out on my own that much. I'd still go camping out with my buddies, but it wasn't the same kind of camping trips. But anyways, this knife, I still love it. I still love this knife. I just prefer a smaller knife nowadays. That's the only reason I don't go to this. But preferring a smaller knife wasn't always the case. So this brings us to the next knife that I used primarily. The Bussy Steelheart 2. Now this is a meaty, heavy-duty cutting sucker. Now Bussy knives were all the rave back in the day. This is made out of 01 tool steel. It's super hard. One thing I love about how hard this is when you knock on it. You can just tell that is a hard piece of steel. And it is thick too. Yeah. This originally belonged to my grandpa, and he had a couple different sizes of blades from Bussy, and he preferred the smaller one. I believe it was called the Badger Attack, and like I'm kind of guessing on the year ranges here, but I believe it was around the time I was 21, 22. My grandpa gave this knife to me. This belonged to him, and he gave it to me. And I loved how I could chop all day with this knife, and it would still be sharp enough to shave with. I thought that was cool, and just having this big heavy knife, you know, here I am in my early 20s, full of testosterone, swinging the big old knife around, chopping everything in sight. That was a blast. So it was a couple years I used this knife primarily. Sometimes, depending on what I was doing, I would switch back and forth between the Bushranger and the Steelheart 2 here. But mainly this was what I carried for a couple years, and I just had a lot of fun with this knife. But the one downside to this knife was, even though you could chop and chop and chop and it would hold this edge perfectly, well, this blade's so thick and the style of grind it has, it just wasn't a great carving knife. But again, back in those days, I just wanted to run around chopping stuff up with my knife, so it didn't really matter to me too much until I hit about my mid-20s, and then things took a drastic change. How in my mid-20s, I started getting really into those TV shows like Dual Survival and Man vs. Wild, Survivor Man, all those that were going on. Before that, I started watching those shows, the only videos I've really seen of people out in the woods were the old Ron Hood videos from, I believe those were from the late 90s mostly, and I've actually, throughout time, I've built up a nice little collection of those myself. But watching Cody Lundeen, I really liked the way he handled himself in the woods, the way he carried himself, and just the way he approached things. And it really got me thinking, like, yeah, I want to try a smaller knife. And I found out that he carried a Mora, and it was around the same time that I was got my first Swedish fire steel made by Light My Fire, and I found out through a catalog that Light My Fire and Mora did a knife together called the Swedish Fire Knife. And this was my first experience with a Mora, and man, oh man, this thing blew me away. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is a stainless steel blade. It does have a hard 90-degree edge on the spine, which was my first knife of that style. And it has the little ferro rod in the handle here. So the spine, I mean, it's not a true full tang, but the knife, the same steel that's in the blade does come all the way to the back of the handle. It just tapers down here towards the back end of the handle. But this knife, man, I didn't realize that this thing was so... Oh yeah, the last time I used this, I think I gut some fish with it. I was gutting some fish with it, so it's got some fish residue on there still. But this was my introduction to Mora, like I said, and I just was blown away that a knife this price, I believe this was around $30 at the time, that a knife of this price could be so amazing. And just, I don't know, that smaller blade, you can do pretty much anything with it other than the heavy chopping. But at this stage of my outdoor life, I was also carrying a hatchet, or I'd carry a machete with me for the chopping, and I let this little guy do all the fine-tune work. So after my experience with this knife right here, I didn't use this as a primary knife for very long, maybe about 6 months or so, but it was very important in my journey to finding the perfect knife. So this knife led me to want to spend a little more money and see what Mora really had to offer. So this next knife, you guys have seen me use a lot. I think almost every single video I've made, the fixed blade knife that I was using was the Mora Bushcraft Black. And I think I got this, it was around $50, somewhere in that price range, but I've been using this knife for years now, and man, I love it. And up until just recently, there was nothing I had seen that made me want to use something besides this. Again, this it's a carbon steel. It has that hard 90-degree spine, like is beautiful for scraping ferro rods with on a good hard knife. With that 90-degree spine, I can get way more sparks than I can with any of those little scrapers that come attached by a lanyard to the ferro rods that you buy. And it's just nice to not have to worry about one one more little thing that could get lost. But yeah, this knife has been through a lot. I don't know if you can see the handles got some pretty good wear on it. For the price of this knife, the edge holds up superb. I was really surprised by this. I mean, I can't go and baton my way to you know, through some thick branches and then shave with it. It's not quite that good of a steel, or not quite that hard anyways, but just a little bit of a stropping and it's right back to shaving sharp. And the style of grind, the Scandi grind on these, it was my first exposure to a bigger blade with that, other than the fire knife, but it's not quite as pronounced on that knife as it is on the Bushcraft Black here. I was just blown away by like the ease of making shavings with this bad boy. It was really cool, and spent a lot of years with this knife. The back's even all beat up from using it for making flint and steel fires. Yeah, this is my all-time favorite knife. But I came across something, and for those of you who don't know, I really enjoy some of the throwback gear, the gear that it's modernized, but it's replicating the look of something from the past. And I really like stuff like that when it comes to being out in the woods. I like to think about the way that the mountain man did things, and that's why I liked sleeping with a wool blanket so much. It just fascinates me, the way that those guys lived. And I came across this knife. Actually, first I came across a review video of this knife and thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I've heard of that knife style before, so I looked into it a little bit. And hang on a second here, it's starting to warm up a little. But anyways, I watched that review of the knife and I just fell in love with it instantly, love at first sight. So then I read on some forums, some people talking about the knife and what they thought of it. And it was a little over double the price of my Moras, and I felt like, okay, I better really commit to this thing, you know, if I'm gonna buy it. So I ended up buying it. Got here a few weeks ago. And that knife is the Essie JG5. It's a Nessmuck style blade. It's got the hard 90-degree spine like I love. The handle is designed for really great traction, and it's actually a fairly large handle. As you can see, the handle is almost as long as the blade is, and that's great because I have a wide palm, and a lot of knives don't have handles that fit my hand very comfortably, and this one gives my hand plenty of room. I cannot wait to use this more. This is also a carbon steel. It's I'm pretty sure it's a 1095. Yeah, after seeing this thing, I fell in love with it. I like George Washington Sears' approach from his book, I believe it was Woodcraft and Camping, his approach to the ultralight style of camping, and he kind of had his own style of tools that he preferred to use, and this was the style of knife, which actually looks very common to the butcher knife style, which was popularly used by the mountain men because there wasn't companies, you know, that you could just order a knife from to take to the woods. So they just used the best butcher's knife that they had in the house and used that for all their chores around camp. So I am very, very excited to see what kind of adventures I can have with this knife. I have used it a little bit before this video because I'm going to make a review on this knife. Now, I'm going to do a review a little different than what I've seen anybody else do. Most people, and I've done this too, you just take your new tool that you want to test out, you take it out for an hour or two, do all the different things you can think of doing with it, and then you give your opinion at the end. Well, what I want to do differently is I want to do my review over the course of 3 or 4 weeks of using this knife. So there might be, you know, a really good day where, oh man, I love this knife, and there might be a bad day where it's, oh, I wish I had my Mora for this task. And in the end, I'll be able to have a little bit more accurate of opinion. And I hope you guys we'll look forward to watching that video once I get it done. But anyways, this has been my journey through survival knives. It's been about 20 years to go from the Cold Steel Bushranger to the SCJG5. So yeah, this has been kind of a cool reflection, remembering what each one of these felt like. You know, I can actually remember and picture what it felt like each time I held one of these for the first time. And that first time I stuck one into a piece of wood, there's a lot of memories right here in front of me, a lot of memories. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoy this video and continue enjoying my channel. I really appreciate you guys. It's been a lot of fun so far, and I look forward to continue growing and bringing you guys better and better content as I move forward. I have noticed that I go back and watch some of my old videos, they're a little bit cringy to me, and I can see a change. The more I've been doing this, I can see a change. It's getting better. I can talk a little more comfortably in front of the camera. I can keep my train of thought a little better when the camera's rolling, and that's pretty cool to see in myself. Yeah, this has been a fun journey so far. I can't wait to see where it goes. Thank you everybody for watching. I'll see you on the next one.